July 26, 2019. I'm Rosemary Hobbs, and I'm interviewing Alex Hartley at the Newkirk Public Library, Newkirk, Oklahoma. I am a member of the 4-H Go-Getters Club. This is for the Oklahoma Military Hall of Fame project. What motivated you to join the military?
I guess growing up in a small town and not having a lot of exposure to the outside world, I was really interested in seeing the rest of the world and finding something that was probably bigger than myself. I still struggle with that today with my normal job, like trying to find something that's fulfilling, lifelong fulfilling, not just working for somebody or making money or whatever. So I was really looking for that. I was looking to get out of the small town, experience the world, and see what the world had to offer and what I could offer the world.
Tell me a little bit about your time in basic training.
Okay, so basic training was interesting. You have a lot of preconceptions going into basic training about what to expect, and I expected some of the stuff that the movies portrayed, and I didn't quite get that. Growing up on a small farm in northern Oklahoma with a dad who worked you very hard from a very young age, I found basic training easy, I guess, lacking in some regards. I have watched other grown men break down into tears over certain tasks and things, and I thought, boy, that sure is interesting to experience. But for myself, I thought it was really easy. I ran track in high school, along with every other sport that they had to offer at the time, so I was really good at long-distance running. There's a lot of running in basic training, a lot of running. And when you get tired of running, then you turn around and you run back where you came from. So lots of that going on. And it's a very physical thing. So being in shape going into the military helped me out tremendously. I didn't have to overcome some of those obstacles that some of the other less in shape people had to. But it was a really neat experience because you see people from all over the world for the first time. And again, coming from a small town, you get exposed to these other cultures. There's people from other countries that became naturalized citizens just so they could join the Army. So you get to see a lot of variation and a lot of differences just in cultures in the United States and East Coast, West Coast, and again, not being outside of this small town a lot. I have been out a little bit, but it was a really interesting aspect. One of the things I remember is, so when you get into your assigned bunks, you have a bunk mate. So there's a top and a bottom bunk, and those become your battle buddies, what they call. You don't go anywhere without your battle buddy. You're always in pairs. That way you don't get lost, or if you get separated from the group, you have somebody there to rely on. So my battle buddy was from Puerto Rico, and he broken English. And the Puerto Ricans are a very proud people, if you don't know that. They really are. And they take pride in everything they do. And he was really good at cleaning things and meticulous details of things, polishing boots, stuff like that. And I kind of overlooked some of that stuff. I did the outside farm type cleaning, which isn't quite the same as the indoor meticulous cleaning was. So he kind of, I think you could tell, he kind of didn't have a lot of respect for me at that point in time. He didn't know me very well, and he saw that. Now, at the end of basic training, you go out on what they call a training exercise, where you go out into the woods and you train and do things like out in the woods. And you have to do a foxhole. You have to dig a foxhole out, a big hole in the ground for you to be in. Well, I'm really good at digging. I'm really good at making foxholes, evidently. So I dug my foxhole and looked over at him. Mine was this deep, and his was about this deep by the time I got done. And so I went over and helped him dig his foxhole. And in his broken English, he came to me when I was done, and he put his hand on me and said, I clean the things, you dig the holes. And that was, in his way, telling me that he respected me for my abilities and what I could do. And after that, we became a lot closer. One of the other people that I met, I think that I remember most in basic training, his name was Ross Lay, and he's still one of my best friends today. He grew up in Missouri, in a farm as well. A little bit more backwoods than Newkirk is. A really big guy, he's about 6'1" or 6'2", probably 300 pounds when he joined basic training. So he's a big guy. And we had to go to an obstacle course. And it's a lot of walls you have to climb over, and they have this big tower that comes up, and you have to climb to the next level and the next level and the next level. Well, I remember watching him, as big as he is, and as clumsy and as slow as he seemed, climb that like a squirrel. I mean, he just went to the next level. And then he lay down on his belly and he reached down and he grabbed people by their belts and just pick them up and help them up and just pick them up. And I was like, wow. And then he would just, clamber up to the next level. And I remember thinking, that guy can climb for a big guy. I mean, he is like a squirrel. And he's like, yeah. And I'll have to paraphrase his voice, but he's like, I climbed a lot of trees when I was growing up. And we're still probably one of my best friends today, and I still talk to him weekly.
Okay, what was your primary job after training?
So I went to Fort Leonard Wood, Missouri. They had what they called OSUT training, one station unit training, where you do basic training and your AIT, which is your job, at the same place and the same time. There's not really a break in there. It's just all one thing. So 8 weeks of basic training, and then we had 5 weeks of AIT. At the time when I joined to be a 12 Bravo, which is a combat engineer. And what they do is they provide support to the infantry for mobility or counter-mobility support. And what that means is if on the battlefield you encounter an obstacle that you can't get past, we come through and we blow that obstacle up or move it out of the way or whatever. Now on the counter of that, if we're trying to force the enemy into a certain location, we'll build obstacles, and that could be minefields or wire obstacles or whatever, to try to force them in a specific way that we want them to move. So that job is a very physically taxing job. The AIT was the shortest. That was one of the reasons I picked it. I was like, I don't want to be in basic training forever. I don't want to be in job training forever. I want to get out and do the Army thing. So that's one of the reasons I picked it. The other thing is you get to blow stuff up, and who doesn't like to do that? But after 4 years of that, I found myself being physically taxed but not mentally taxed. And I really enjoy the mental aspect of certain things, so I picked a different job. So my second job was what they called a 33 Whiskey, and that's an electronic warfare and intercept systems repair. I was a spy equipment repairman, basically. So that allowed me to use my mental capacities a lot more, and I really enjoyed that, and it helped me transition more into the commercial world after I got out of the military.
Were you deployed? If so, where and for what?
Okay, so I wasn't deployed in the usual sense, but I was stationed overseas, both in South Korea and in Germany for a short period of time. I really enjoyed South Korea. The thing about South Korea is they're not very defined yet. After the Korean War, they kind of started over. They were, horse-drawn carts and stuff before the Korean War, and then after the Korean War, they're like, hey, we now have cars. So imagine a bunch of people who have never driven in their life now teaching the younger generations to drive cars who have never driven a car in their life. So they don't abide by any traffic laws. They don't abide by a lot of the rules that you would normally abide by here. So when I got over there, I was able to buy a car because I was a staff sergeant, which is an E6 at the time. And so I bought a car for $400, and it was a piece of junk, and that's fine. You don't want a nice car over there because people will run into you. And I got to drive around the country, and it was interesting to pull up to a stoplight that was red and just kind of look both ways and go through it. Because if you didn't, you would get rear-ended, because they do not stop at stoplights. They don't care what color it is. And I remember driving along and looking on the side of the road and seeing the police asleep on the hood of their cars, and no one really cared. So it's interesting. Now, one thing, I was a platoon sergeant over there. One thing I got to experience was there's Korean soldiers that are assigned to the Army, the U.S. Army, to help with language barriers and to help them with culture and things like that. Being the platoon sergeant, I was in charge of 5 what they call KATUSAs. These are, and it's K-A-T-U-S-A, Korean augmentee to the U.S. Army. And these are generally kids who have been to college, speak very good English. Most of them have degrees, some of them PhDs or master's degrees, so they're well educated. They typically come from wealthy families. But they're very interesting characters because they're very happy to be with the U.S. Army, because if they're not with the U.S. Army, that means they have to be in the ROK Army, the Republic of Korea Army. And their army is not as lenient as our army. They do some really horrible things. They have to go out in the snow and train and lay in the snow and do all kinds of stuff like that. And so these guys know that if there's the U.S. Army, then we're going to have it really easy. And so they really enjoyed that. And these KATUSAs couldn't leave the base unless they were accompanied by an NCO, a non-commissioned officer, which I was. And I had a car. So I would load them up in my car and I'd say, let's go see Korea. Not the, let's go see the Korea that all the, the tourists want to see, but let's go see the real Korea. And I got to experience a lot of really cool things, got to see a lot of cool places. that most people didn't get to see just because I had these guys with me. And there was no language barrier because I had translators built in. And there are some cultural things that I experienced that I got to learn that most people probably didn't. So I really, really enjoyed my time there. I got to experience a lot of the country that most people didn't. And I really enjoyed that.
Yeah.
One more, sorry, I have to add this. This is the greatest story I can remember while I was there. So I was at Camp Humphreys military base, and a lot of times we would have, probably college students is probably what they were, that type of generation, that would stand outside the gates and protest about us being in their country. Now, I can understand that. Maybe they don't understand, why we're there or what our role is in that. But I remember being on the gate guard, just in case, things got escalated. And looking out there and seeing this really old, feeble man hobble along with a cane. Just really old, and he could barely even move. And I watched him walk up to this young kid, pick up his cane, and just start beating the crap out of these young kids. And he's screaming at him in Korean, and I look over at my Katusa, and I'm like, what is he telling them? What is he screaming at them? And he's screaming, you don't know, you don't remember what it was like before they came along. And you're like, wow, like that's amazing that he remembers back before the Korean War, during the Korean War, and experienced all that. And a lot of the younger generation didn't know that, and he was giving it to them, a crash course real quick with his cane. So it was really cool.
What was the most demanding part about your deployment?
The most demanding part? I think a lot of it was just being away from family. Usually when you're deployed, and I was gone for a year to South Korea, and I was gone to Germany for only 3 months, but a year is a long time to be away from your family. A lot changes. Typically, and I was married at the time with a daughter, so when you go away, I was in charge of the household. I took care of things, took care of bills, took care of all the things that you would normally take care of. And when I got back, that whole assignment of duties had shifted. My wife at the time had to take care of everything because I wasn't there to take care of it. So then there was a kind of a clash of duties when you get back where you have to reestablish, okay, who's going to do what, because they've taken over that role for you because you've been gone. And then just being away in general is always tough on people. I was lucky enough to have technology at the time and a computer that I could chat with on Skype kind of thing. It wasn't Skype, but be able to chat and see them in person and talk with them. So I was very lucky in that regard. I think a lot of the older generations probably had it a lot harder because they didn't have that communication. They couldn't contact someone daily, maybe weekly by a letter or even longer. So I think that's always the hardest aspect.
Mm-hmm. Where did you serve the majority of your time in the service?
I served everywhere. So I started at Fort Leonard Wood, Missouri in basic training. I then went to Fort Lewis, Washington in Washington State, then Fort Riley, Kansas, and then I went to Fort Huachuca, Arizona, and then I went to South Korea, then back to Fort Huachuca, Arizona, and then also out to Fort Belvoir, Virginia. So really all across the United States, and then South Korea. And then Germany was kind of a short-term thing, so it was only 3 months, but that was while I was at Fort Riley. But I got to see a lot of different bases, a lot of different people, a lot of different cultures, because I have been all across the United States and, Europe and Asia as well. So.
Okay. What rank are you most proud to have earned and why?
I would say my rank of E5, which was sergeant. At the time, the fastest you could get E5 was 2.5 years, and I made it at 2.5 years. That was as fast as military doctrine would allow, period. And that was a lot faster than every one of my other peers. So I made it to E5 a lot faster than anyone else. And that became apparent when I was in Germany. I was there and they're helping support some National Guard and reservist units. And some of those guys that are usually E3, E4s, lower ranking guys, could be 30 or 40-year-old men. And here I was, a 20-year-old kid as an E5 in charge of all these guys. And that's a hard thing to manage when you're like, oh, this is a much older gentleman that I'm now in charge of, or a group of much older gentlemen. And they probably look at me like I don't have any experience or anything like that. And that's hard to overcome. But that's interesting.
Mm-hmm. Which medals or citations are you most honored to have received and why?
A lot of the medals that I got, I felt like was kind of congratulations on doing your job. And that's the way I kind of saw it. A lot of those things, you're like, well, I didn't really go that much above and beyond. I just went a little, did what I needed to do. The one thing I am proud of, though, and I did put a lot of work into, is I am a member of the Sergeant Audie Murphy Club. And that entails a big medallion that I get to wear around my neck when we went to balls, or we went to fancy events and had to dress up. That is a group of non-commissioned officers, a very small group in the military actually, that get together and they exchange ideas on how to be better leaders and how to be better providers for their soldiers and how to help with certain aspects in the military. So that entails going, at the time I was in South Korea, I had to go to Yongsan, which is down the road, and then up to Seoul for the final thing, but you sit in a board all day long with all these senior ranking military people, and they gruelingly test you and task you on different things, and you have to know everything about your soldiers, you have to have a book, you have to know birthdays, you have to know everything about them, because it really is about that. And I remember at the very last question, they're like, why are you here? And that has always stuck with me, because even now when I'm gone or I'm doing other things or I'm overseas, that always comes into my mind, like, why are you here? And the whole essence of the Sergeant Audie Murphy Board is to better yourself so you can then better the people around you, better your soldiers. So that was a very important thing for me to accomplish, and I was the first one in the 501st MI Brigade to ever receive that. So that's a history point in the 501st MI Brigade in Korea. My picture's up there as the #1 guy, so that was kind of cool. So that's probably the thing I'm most proud of, because I felt like I actually worked really hard for that.
Tell me about some of the special people you met.
There's a lot of special people in the military, both good and bad, and across the board. It's interesting. Like I said, one of my very best friends to this day I met in the military. But one of the things that really sticks out to me, well, there's several different people. I'll start with the beginning. My drill instructor. That's the person when you first come in the military that really makes an impact on you. Mine was Sergeant Tad Steckler. You never forget their names either. And he was a really goofy guy, really quirky, but he was very patriotic. And what we did was every morning they woke us up. And it's usually a rough wake up, like, hey, you guys get up, not like, just yelling, but it's kicking trash cans down the hallway, something very loud and vivid that'll wake you up and grasp your attention. But he also played Guns N' Roses' Welcome to the Jungle every single morning, and he would blast it down the hallway while kicking stuff. And you almost want to wake up now like that, because it really wakes you up and you get really pumped. And then before we went to bed, we all sat in the hallway at attention, or not sat, but stood in the hallway at attention, all the way down the hallway, a group of guys, all the way down the hallway to the other side. And we sang Proud to Be an American, whatever, I can't remember, Lee, yeah, that, but anyways, yeah. We sung that every night, and a bunch of grown men singing, a song like that is very powerful before you go to bed. So that was he was probably the first person that really made an impact. You're like, that's not the way, not everybody would do it, but that was his way of doing it, and it was effective. Everybody felt pumped when they woke up in the morning, and everybody felt proud when they went to bed at night. So I think that's probably #1. #2, I would say, is probably most of my leadership. I had a captain one time who was just the coolest guy ever. He was in charge of the company, and he was always trying to find ways to make training interesting. And I was helping him out directly for a lot of that period of time, and he was looking for ways to make things fun. And so when you're looking for ways to train, it's not the same old, hey, let's get a Humvee out or a truck out and let's go drive out into the woods and train. So he found a way to talk to the local helicopter squadron to get Chinooks in, to fly us all out to training and fly us all back. And I just remember sitting there looking at him and watching him walk through the process of, how can I do this? Who can I reach out to? And he just picked up the phone and started dialing people. He dialed, like I said, the Helo Squadron. It's like, hey, do you guys need any training? They're like, yeah, we need training all the time. So watching somebody reach out and work that hard just to make something fun for his guys so it was different and break up the monotony, to see him put that much effort in there made an impact on me as well. So I was really impressed with that, and it still sticks with me today.
Yeah. What was the best and worst military food you were eating?
So that's a tough one for me because I eat a lot and I enjoy eating, and there's not really a bad meal I've ever come across. I think most people don't like MREs, but I love MREs. I can eat MREs every day, and I did eat them for a very long time. Love them. So I guess one thing was they had an old batch of MREs. I want to say they were probably post-Vietnam, but they weren't far after that. But they supposedly don't go bad. They might not have been as good as they should have been. They're a little different. But I really couldn't tell you any meal that I didn't like. I enjoy, a lot of it's like school cafeteria food, right? It's made for a large group of people. It kind of tastes all the same. But it doesn't bother me.
Okay. Tell me a funny story you experienced that could only happen in the military.
Oh, there's so many. I was trying to figure out which one I wanted to say. I think it comes to a training exercise I did in the National Training Center in California one time. Myself, one of my good friends, Ross Lay, we just happened to be on the same team. They decided they wanted to start this new thing. It was called an engineer recon team. So typically the guys that go and recon everything were called scouts, and they would go forward and they would look and they would annotate where obstacles were and the battlefield layout and where the enemy was and all this stuff. They take all this information. Well, they found out that when the scouts would take down all this information, they wouldn't see the obstacles correctly. So when the engineers, which I was at the time, had to go through, the obstacles weren't what they said and we didn't prepare correctly, and it was really a breakdown. So they wanted to attach engineers to the scouts to help provide a more vivid picture of the battlefield, obstacle-wise and stuff like that. So what they did was they created 2 4-man teams. First group ever to do this. There was 4 engineers on each team, and myself and my friend Ross were on one team with additional 2 people, and there was another team. So the thing they didn't anticipate was they didn't assign an officer to us. So we E5s were the highest ranking guys on the teams, which is usually not a good thing to do because we don't have any top cover. We don't have any people saying this is the right way to do it, that's the right way to do it. We just kind of make it up as we go. So we got out to the training center, and they gave us both Humvees, and we got attached to the scouts, and the scouts were like, well, we don't really like you guys. We don't want you to tag along with us. Just do your own thing. So we're like, okay. And so we kind of started off slow in the battle, and the battle would develop, and they have all these different scenarios and things laid out for the whole course of a couple weeks while we're out there. And we started traveling in the Humvee, and we would get out, stop, walk forward and reconnoiter, and then come back, get in the Humvee and drive forward a little bit. So one night I remember driving, and what they do is they assign things called OCs, observer controllers, to us. And it's another guy in a Humvee that basically has a special thing around his helmet to tell him that he's just there to watch us and make sure we're playing by the rules of the battlefield. And so we came up one night to a tank ditch that they were still digging. The enemy was digging a ditch, to stop tanks. And they were doing it from this mountaintop to that mountaintop. And they started in the middle and they started working their way out. Well, there's 2 obstacles when you get to, there's 2 options when you get to a tank ditch. You can drive all the way around that side or all the way around that side. Or the most unlikely one is to jump the tank ditch. And so we were in Humvees at the time, and we're thinking, let's not go that way, because there's also, usually when they're digging, and there's dozers and stuff like that where they're digging, they have tanks with them to help provide a defense. So we don't want to get shot at, so we don't want to go that way, we don't want to go that way. And so we got out, we started looking at the tank ditch and kind of looking at the ramp angle, and we got some shovels out and kind of made a little ramp, and we backed the Humvee up. We all get out except for my buddy Ross, who was driving, and we're like, do it! And so he jumps it, and the tank ditch is from here to that wall probably. It's a good jump. And he jumps the Humvee, and it lands, all the stuff flies out of the Humvee. We have to go back to the ditch and pick it up, and we crawl across the ditch by foot, and we get over there and we get in the Humvee, and we look back, and the observer controller's going, now what? He's like, I'm not doing that. And well, we're not waiting on you, so you're going to have to go around and catch up. So that was interesting, because I don't think you'd ever seen anybody jump a tank ditch before in a Humvee. I don't think you're supposed to, but again, we didn't have anybody telling us we couldn't, so we just made the rules up. At the end of this traveling, when we're doing, we ended up going up to this mountaintop to create an observation post where it's just a spot where you can observe the enemy, you can observe the battlefield, and kind of lay out and radio back to the commanders what's happening. And so the main body of the enemy we're back there barbecuing because it's just a training exercise. So they're back there barbecuing and they're out there, messing around and stuff. And we're like, hey, we have their position. Like, yeah, we can't use that. You can't defeat the training effect by dropping mortars or artillery on them while they're back there. That's defeating the training. We're like, okay, fine. So the next morning, the enemy starts rolling through this valley, and so we start calling out grids to artillery to drop bombs on them and stuff, and all virtual. It's not real. And so they start dropping all this stuff, and the enemy gets diverted over to this canyon where we're at, and we're shooting at them and stuff. And what they did was they had this laser stuff. So you're not shooting real bullets; it shoots lasers, and it just, when the laser hits the tank goes like this, has a little light that goes off to let them know they were hit. And I remember we're sitting on that mountain, and we hit the tank, and it stopped. And the OC is like, okay, it's disabled, it can't go anywhere, but everybody inside is still alive. So we had to run down the mountain, and we got our, our guns and stuff, and we're opening the back of the tank. We're like, hey, we commandeered the vehicle basically, and there had all these maps. So this guy was evidently the commander for the whole opposing force, and he had maps and battle layouts for the next 7 days of training. And so we're like, we'll take that. We'll take that. And we radio up and say, hey, we got all the battle plans for the next 7 days. And the commander goes back and he goes, yeah, they're not going to let us use that because you're going to defeat the training for the next 7 days. And we're like, well, that sucks. And then we're like, hey, we have the commander here too. He's alive and we captured him. Can we bring him back? And they're like, how do you know he's the commander? You don't know he's the commander. He's like, no, I'm pretty sure he's the commander. He said, I'm the commander. You can't do this. And so at the end of this whole training iteration, we caused so much havoc that the Op 4 commander had never given a coin. Now, you give out a lot of coins sometimes for cool things. And this could have relayed back to one of my favorite things that I could have gotten an award. The Op 4 commander says, I've never in my entire life given out a coin to a training group that came in here. But you guys caused so much havoc and caused us so much headache, I can't help but just give you guys something. And then after that, they usually have this big board because all the trucks and people have tracking devices on them. And it's like, I just want to show you the last battle of the day where you guys were out there. And it shows us going all like this. Like, we were all over the map. But like, no, everyone else was like, we're like. So that was a really good time. I really enjoyed that. We had a lot of really good fun when we didn't have anybody in charge of us and we could do whatever we wanted. And it just shows how effective having officers out of your hair can be.
Okay. How does your military experience affect your life today?
So it's been a huge influence. Like I said, when I changed jobs into 33 Whiskey, which was an electronic war spy equipment repairman, after I got out, I immediately got a job at Texas Instruments down in Dallas, doing a lot of electronics type stuff. And then I worked for Microsoft for 2 years, just based on the amount of experience I had in the military dealing with big systems, computers, all that type of stuff. And now it's even more of an impact because when I was in South Korea, I was part of a airborne reconnaissance program, and I do that now for a job. So I'm a Department of Defense contractor, which is, I'm doing almost exactly the same thing I did in the military while I was in South Korea, but now I'm doing it as a civilian employee. So it's been a huge impact. I don't think you'll ever find a group of people. It's kind of like, I guess, if you're in school and you're part of a team, right? You're part of a sports team, or you're part of a band, or whatever you want to call it. It's the same kind of aspect. You're part of a team. And the military is a team unlike any other, because very few teams do you rely on each other for your lives. Do you rely on each other for emotional support, physical support, anything you can imagine? Very few groups is it going to be that intense and that important to rely on those people next to you. So it is unlike any other team. It is a very close-knit community. Even after the fact, I think a lot of military and veteran members still kind of get drawn towards one another. We have a lot of the same interests and aspects in our life that we've had to deal with, and I think it's a very challenging group sometimes because there are a lot of things that guys and women that come back from overseas have to deal with. And so it's good to have that closeness and be able to talk and communicate back and forth with one another.